Well, I think on the inflation front, the data are going to make the case for continued Fed normalisation. So we've been through this soft patch. Clearly we saw from Kaplan, he's kind of concerned about the low inflation print, wants to see more evidence that inflation will ultimately pick up.
Is that evidence going to be forthcoming before year end when, December could be on or off the table in terms of another rate hike?
Well, I have a strong conviction we will see strong inflation data come through. There's been a number of idiosyncratic factors which have been pushing down inflation numbers. Wireless communication, we had this move to unlimited data contracts and a big drop in inflation in March. We've had some very quirky moves in lodging away from home. That's hotels for you and I. That will almost certainly reverse over the next few months. So at least we should print more normal inflation numbers, which will make the Fed feel confident about continuing with this gradual normalisation.
Every single data point that I see when it comes to the labour market, which by the way has pretty much been fulfilled in terms of their mandate, hasn't it, to continue hiking rates. But every single data point I see shows things like, firings are dropping because everybody's trying to hold on to their employees because it's just so hard to find skilled workers out there. You've got almost full employment, don't you? And so from that point of view, while wage growth has been a little lackluster, down the line, economic theory would just say that it's got to pick up even more down the line, wouldn't you say?
I think so. So measures of recruitment difficulties are at very elevated levels right now. Yes, the wage numbers have been somewhat muted, but you could argue only in line with productivity, which also has been disappointing. So the unit labour cost pressures are still there in the US, and I think they are set to intensify going forward.
Do you think if we do get any form of tax reform, which could be stimulatory to the economy, that could also push the case for further hikes?
So this is a very interesting angle. So the market at the moment doesn't believe tax reform will get done at all. I think actually there's a much better chance we will see some additional stimulus, probably deficit funded, and that comes at an extremely bad time. Given the US economy is at full employment, it doesn't need that stimulus. And it could well force the Fed to tighten more aggressively next year.
I just want to pick up on some of those elements. I mean, I think wages are a good point because it seems a little bit more traditional that if you have a tight labour force, you start to eventually get a pick up in wages. But the items you mentioned about the wireless market and data, we've already seen even here yesterday the impact on car phone warehouse, on what people are willing to spend on mobile phones, and you've got a market that is driving ever lower. I don't see how that changes down the track. You've got more and more options, and sure, base effects might start to come into the mix, but overall you think the pricing level for data mobile is going to stay cheap for much longer. The other big point around lodging, there are all different types of options these days on accommodation, not just hotels. I mean, Airbnb type of products, for instance, that mean the overall price level is lower. So the traditional mix between demand and supply, I think, has been fundamentally altered by technology, which central bankers are going to have to contend with.
So there are some structural factors clearly preventing inflation from rising more rapidly. We're not talking about inflation going up to 3–4%, merely returning towards target and that allowing the Fed to continue with this gradual normalisation path. In the wireless space, we had this very aggressive plunge in prices. We've seen persistent deflation in this sector for a number of years. I think it's more just returning to that kind of path rather than these sudden price drops which have artificially depressed the CPI over the last few months.